The text came in just as I was setting the table for dinner. She needs our support. I'm moving in with her. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady, my breathing even. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't waver when I called my son down for dinner. The only sign that my husband of 14 years had just shattered our marriage with one careless message was the slow, deliberate way I put down my phone. I stared at the words again. She needs our support. And then the final blow came. Another text. She's pregnant, Sophia. We have to be there for her. I know this is a lot to take in, but we can be adults about this. Pregnant. A sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out the soft hum of my son in the background. I forced myself to breathe, to remain still, to think. My younger sister Emily, 9 years younger than me, the baby of our family, the one I had practically raised after our mother passed away, and my husband, the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted with everything, the man I had never questioned. Until now. The betrayal should have broken me, but it didn't. Because 3 months ago, I had already found something, a receipt, tucked inside James's jacket pocket, a hotel charge on a night he swore he was out with friends. That was the first crack in the foundation. I hadn't confronted him. Not then. Instead, I prepared. And now James thought he had emptied our joint account, thinking he had won. He was about to learn the truth. The money he drained? It wasn't much. The house he thought he could walk away with? It was in my name. The future he thought he had stolen? It wasn't his to take, so I typed my response. Congratulations. No anger, no emotion, just that one word. If James thought I would beg or scream, if he thought I would fall apart, he was about to be very, very disappointed. Looking back, the signs had always been there. The late nights at work, the sudden generosity, offering to help Emily move into her new apartment, checking in on her constantly. Emily had even joked about it. Not every brother-in-law is this supportive, you know. She laughed one night over dinner. I had smiled, I had agreed. Because why wouldn't I? James and I had built a life together, a home, a family. We had a 12-year-old son who adored his father. I had spent 14 years trusting James, believing in him, and Emily. She was family, and family doesn't betray you until they do. The betrayal should have crushed me, but I had already seen the first crack in the foundation 3 months ago. It was small at first, a receipt tucked into James's jacket pocket. A hotel charge on a night he swore he was out with friends. I had stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, stomach twisting. I could have confronted him, but I didn't. Instead, I did something better. I prepared. While James was working late, I sat at my laptop, quietly rerouting my personal savings into a separate account. I left just enough in our joint account to keep him from getting suspicious. Then I started looking deeper. Credit card statements, suspicious charges, flowers, jewelry, hotel rooms. I had already suspected an affair, but I never, not in my worst nightmares, imagined this. And now, here we were. James, so confident in his deception, had emptied our joint account thinking he had won. He was about to learn the truth. The money he drained, it wasn't much. The house he thought he could walk away from, it was in my name. The future he thought he had stolen, it wasn't his to take. That night, after putting my son to bed, I poured myself a glass of James's expensive wine, the one he had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed fitting enough. And then my phone buzzed. Another message. I know this is hard for you, but Emily is young. She was scared. It just happened. We never meant for it to go this far. Please don't make this ugly. I actually laughed. Ugly? He thought I was the one making this ugly? I took a slow sip of wine, then forwarded the message to my lawyer, the one I had quietly retained 2 months ago. Then I picked up my phone and typed my response. I understand, you're right. She needs your support. Take care of her. And then I waited for him to realize the trap he had walked into.
Because while James was out there celebrating his new life, thinking he had gotten away with betraying his wife, his family, he had no idea. By the time he figured it out, it would already be too late. James didn't reply to my last message. Maybe he was expecting more anger, more tears, a desperate plea for him to reconsider. But I had given him nothing, just a simple, take care of her. I imagined him staring at his phone, waiting for me to fall apart. But I was already 3 steps ahead. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. I packed my son's lunch for school, poured myself coffee, and hummed along to the radio.
"Where's Dad?" Liam asked, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I smiled, keeping my voice calm. He had to go help Aunt Emily with something. It wasn't a lie. Liam shrugged, too busy grabbing his sneakers to question it. He didn't need to know the details, not yet. As soon as he was out the door, I picked up my phone and made my first call. It's time. My lawyer had been expecting this. We had been preparing for months. Step 1. Freeze the accounts. James thought he had emptied our finances, but the real money? That had been moved long ago. By 10 a.m., every shared account was locked. By noon, his credit card applications were flagged. By 3 p.m., his personal funds were barely enough for gas money, and by the time he noticed, it was already too late. Step 2. Lock him out. The house was mine, always had been. James had pushed to put his name on the deed last year. I had smiled, I had nodded, I had said, "We'll handle it later." Now? Later was never. The locksmith arrived within the hour. I stood at the front door, watching as the locks changed forever. By 4 p.m., the keys James carried in his pocket were as useless as his promises. And then I waited for him to realize it. By evening, my phone buzzed. James, finally. "What the hell, Sophia? You changed the locks?" I let him wait. The next message came minutes later. "You can't do this. I need to come back and get my stuff. You're being dramatic. My stuff, not our stuff. His stuff." The audacity made me laugh. I texted back, "Oh, I didn't change the locks." A pause, then another message from him. "Then who did?" I smirked, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The owner of the house did." And I hit send. I could practically hear his frustration through the screen. His calls came one after another. I ignored every single one. Then his next text popped up. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I smiled. "No, James, I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be." That evening, Liam asked if his dad would be home for dinner. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Daddy is staying with Aunt Emily for a little while," I said gently. His brows furrowed. "Why? How much do you tell a 12-year-old? How do you explain betrayal in a way that doesn't break his heart?" I kissed his forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices," I said carefully. "And when they do, they have to live with the consequences." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. One word. 1,000 meanings." Later that night, my phone buzzed one last time. "James, we need to talk." I turned off my phone, because for the first time in our marriage, he was the one who needed me. And I wasn't playing by his rules anymore. This was just the beginning. James had always believed he was untouchable. He thought he could lie, cheat, and take what wasn't his. He thought he could walk away unscathed. But today, that illusion shattered, and tomorrow would be even better. The first call came at 8:12 a.m. I let it ring. Then came a text. "You froze the accounts. How could you? Emily and I need that money." I took a sip of my coffee, glancing at the message before setting my phone down. He was panicking. I could imagine him now, frantically checking his banking app, realizing that while he thought he had emptied our joint account, he had actually only walked away with pennies compared to what I had quietly moved months ago. Another call. I let it go to voicemail, then another text. "You can't just leave us with nothing. Emily is pregnant, Sophia.
We're starting a family. We. I almost laughed. James had abandoned his first family without hesitation. And now he expected sympathy for creating a new one. He wasn't asking for support, he was demanding a bailout. At 10 a.m., my lawyer called. James's attorney reached out, she said, amusement in her voice. He's claiming you acted maliciously by freezing the accounts. I smirked. Did you tell them I did it legally? She chuckled. Of course, and that the house was never his. A pause. It seems that was a surprise to him. Let him be surprised. Let him learn. James had spent years living carelessly, spending recklessly, and taking what wasn't his. Now he was out of options, and it was about time. At noon, Emily called. I hesitated, then I answered. Sophia, please talk to him. Silence. He didn't know you were going to do all of this, she continued, her voice shaky. He thought what, Emily? I interrupted. That he could cheat, steal, and still walk away with my home, my money, my life? She sniffled. We're having a baby. And that's my problem. How? A pause. Then quietly she admitted, James told me he had everything under control, that we wouldn't struggle. I exhaled slowly. Emily was young, naive. She had been foolish, but I wasn't interested in punishing her. You made your choice, Emily, I said finally, and now you have to live with it. She started crying.
I don't know what to do. We don't even have a place to stay. My lease is up next month, and James said, a sharp inhale. James said, what? Silence. I already knew. James had promised her the house. That's why he hadn't been truly worried before. He had assumed he could waltz back in, bring his new family with him, and I would just accept it. I laughed under my breath. You're going to have to figure it out, Emily, I said, just like I did. And then I hung up. At 3 p.m., James finally showed up at my doorstep. Bang, bang, bang. Sophia, open up! I let him knock. Then, after a minute, I opened the door, just enough to look at him, but not enough to let him in. His face was red, his hair was disheveled. This wasn't the arrogant man who had sent me that smug text days ago. This was a man who was desperate. You need to let me in, he demanded. No, James. His jaw clenched. Sophia, don't do this. Emily and I are about to have a baby. You're punishing us for something that just happened. I raised an eyebrow. You think this is punishment? A beat of silence. No, James. This is simply you getting exactly what you deserve. His expression twisted. I knew you'd be vindictive. I smirked. You thought I'd be weak. He scoffed. You can't just throw me out like trash. I was your husband for 14 years. I tilted my head. And you threw it all away for a fling with my sister. He flinched. I stepped forward, voice calm. You made your choices, James, and now you get to live with them. I started to close the door, but then, his last pathetic attempt. I'll fight for the house. I have rights. I smiled. Oh, James, you don't have a leg to stand on. His face paled. The house was mine before we ever got married. It's not a marital asset. And thanks to the divorce paperwork I already filed. I watched his hands curl into fists. The courts will see that you abandoned our marriage for another woman. His throat bobbed. He hadn't expected me to act so quickly. I tilted my head. But go ahead. Hire a lawyer. See how that works out for you. I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. Oh, wait. A small smirk curled on my lips. You can't afford one, can you? His nostrils flared, his fists clenched. I could see it. The moment he realized that he had played himself. You're going to regret this, he muttered. I shrugged. Doubt it. And then I shut the door in his face. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt triumphant. But the truth, I just felt free. For the first time in 14 years, James was no longer my problem. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. James's attorney officially acknowledged the divorce filing. Also, they're requesting a meeting. Seems like James is struggling. I smirked. This was just the beginning. James had spent years thinking he was untouchable. He thought he could lie, cheat, steal, and still land on his feet. He thought I would always be there, cleaning up his mess, bailing him out. Not anymore. The first real cracks in James's world appeared the next morning. At 7:30 a.m., my lawyer called. "You're not going to believe this," she said, amusement in her voice. I took a sip of coffee. "Try me." "James is being evicted." I nearly choked. "Evicted? From where?" "Emily's apartment," she explained. Apparently the lease was only in her name, and because she hasn't been able to keep up with rent, the landlord served them an eviction notice last night. I let out a low whistle. So they're both homeless. Looks like it. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. James had abandoned his home, his family, his entire life for my sister, only to find himself without a roof over his head. It was almost poetic. At 9 a.m., I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. And sure enough, James's voice came through the speaker. "You had no right to do this to me," I smirked. "Do what, James?" "Leave you to deal with the mess you created." His voice was sharp, full of bitterness and desperation. "You froze the accounts, took the house, and left me with nothing." I rolled my eyes. "James, I stopped caring the moment you packed your bags and left for my sister." Silence. Then a bitter laugh. "You act like I planned for this to happen." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you? You thought you could run off, build a perfect life with Emily, and still come back whenever you needed something. You thought you could cheat, steal, and destroy our marriage without consequences." He was silent. I leaned in. Well, guess what? I let the silence stretch. Then I delivered the final blow. "You don't get to play the victim now, James." He exhaled harshly. "Sophia, listen, Emily is... She's not what I thought she was. She's immature. She doesn't understand how hard life is." I smirked. So it had finally happened. He had realized that Emily wasn't his fantasy escape. She was just a young, naive woman who had no idea what she was getting into. "She's pregnant, James," I reminded him. "This is what you wanted, remember?" He groaned. "She wants me to find a way to fix everything, like I have some kind of magic wand. She doesn't get it. We have no money, no home, no future." I cut him off. "And whose fault is that?" Silence. I smiled, shaking my head. "You know what's funny, James? You thought Emily was an upgrade. You thought she was better than me, more exciting, younger, easier. But the moment things got tough, she turned to you to solve it." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "And guess what, James?" A long pause, then I whispered, "You were never the kind of man who could solve anything." His breath hitched. "Sophia, please, just let me come back. Just for a little while. I need time to figure things out." I laughed out loud. "You seriously think I'd let you step foot in my house again?" "You're delusional." He was silent. Then his last pathetic attempt. "Sophia, don't do this. You're not like this." I smirked. "You never really knew me, James." And then I hung up. By noon, I received a text from Emily. "I don't know what to do. James left. He just walked out." I stared at the message. So James had abandoned her too. It was only a matter of time. James had never wanted responsibility. Not for me, not for Liam, and certainly not for a pregnant 25-year-old with no money. I let the text sit there for a moment. Then I typed my response. Now you know what it feels like. And I left it at that. At 6 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a well-deserved glass of wine. My lawyer had officially finalized the divorce terms. James had nothing, no house, no money, no credit, no safety net. He had lost everything. And I had gained peace. As I glanced at my phone, I saw one last notification, a voicemail from James. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I deleted it. Because for the first time in 14 years, James was no longer my problem, and I had never felt stronger. It had been 3 weeks since James's final plea. I hadn't heard from him since, but I knew, through mutual acquaintances, that he was bouncing from couch to couch, crashing with old friends who were quickly getting tired of his presence. His savings were gone, his credit was ruined, his job prospects non-existent. He had burned every bridge he had, and now he was drowning. Meanwhile, I was thriving. At 10 a.m., I walked into my boutique, the business James had once mocked as just a little hobby. I greeted my employees with a warm smile. Sales had been better than ever. In fact, I was in the middle of expanding, looking at locations for a second store. My real success had come when I stopped shrinking myself to accommodate a man who had never deserved me. By noon, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Just a heads up, James filed an appeal to revisit the financial settlement. I rolled my eyes. Judge dismissed it immediately. He was also ordered to pay court costs. I smirked. Even in his downfall, he was still trying to manipulate his way back. But this time, no one was coming to save him. That afternoon, while finalizing business plans, I saw a familiar name pop up on my phone. Emily. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. I answered with a simple, yes. She hesitated. I just wanted to say, you were right. I leaned back in my chair. About what? A deep sigh. About James. He left. He told me he wasn't ready to be a father, and that I should have been smarter about birth control. I clenched my jaw.
Of course he did. James had spent years blaming me for everything. And now, Emily was his new scapegoat. She sniffled. I thought he loved me. But he just used me. And now I'm pregnant, alone, and I don't even know how I'm going to afford this baby. I exhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. I feel sorry for you, Emily, but I don't owe you anything. She let out a shaky breath. I know. I just needed you to know. I regret everything. I ruined my relationship with you for a man who never even cared about me. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I said, I hope you learned from this. And then I hung up. Emily would figure it out, just like I had. At 6 p.m., I was getting ready to close the boutique when my assistant walked in, an amused expression on her face. You're not going to believe who I just saw outside, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Who? James. She shook her head. He was standing across the street, just staring at the store. I blinked. He came here? She nodded. He looked terrible, Sophia, like unshaven, wearing the same clothes from days ago, and just lost. I glanced out the window, but he was already gone. Still, I knew what this was. He was realizing what he had thrown away. The comfortable life, the stability, the success. The woman who had stood by him for over a decade.
And now he had nothing. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at my phone. James's number was still blocked, and I had no desire to change that. Instead, I opened my laptop, browsing locations for my second boutique. I smiled to myself. This was what moving on looked like. Not revenge, not anger, not waiting for an apology that would never come. Just building something better. Because while James was stuck in the ruins of his past, I was thriving in my future, and I had never looked back.